it's Becky from the Montgomery County Norristown Public Library, and today I'm going to show you how to make your own homemade applesauce. And this is going to be a little bit different probably from what you're used to if you buy applesauce in a jar or in the little packets to go in your lunch for a snack. But this is very easy, it's very inexpensive, and once you try it and play around with it, it's a good recipe to have. And the applesauce that we make, we're going to take some out. If you want to make the oatmeal applesauce muffin recipe that follows this one, you will need to save some of your applesauce that you make. So I'm going to talk about some housekeeping things before we get started. You'll hear adults always saying, we need to take care of some housekeeping before we can go on with this meeting or before we can start our lesson. And that just basically means there are some things we need to take care of before we get to the fun stuff. So first of all, you want to make sure you always wash your hands before you start cooking. And often while you're cooking, especially if you get something on them that's sticky, or if you're touching raw meat or eggs, raw eggs, you always want to keep your hands clean because there are germs on food that can travel from one place to another, and you just always want to be as clean as you can. This is called sanitation. The other part of keeping yourself clean is pulling back your hair away from your face and so that it's not flopping around and you have to keep playing with it or moving it to get it out of the way. You want to contain it so you don't have to keep touching it. The idea is to try not to touch anything but the food that you're preparing. So if you need to push up your glasses like I do often, use the back of your hand or your arm. If you have to itch your nose, if you have to cough or sneeze, turn your head away, don't into your hands. If you have to blow your nose, then wash your hands when you're done. Just always wash your hands. You can't ever go wrong. You can't ever wash your hands too much when you're cooking. The other thing is to keep your work surfaces clean. And you can do that by just using hot water, dish soap, and a clean dish towel, and just wipe down your surfaces where you're going to be working, your table, your counter, your stovetop, whatever. So you want to make sure all of these things are clean. You want to make sure if you have long sleeves that you roll them up, get them out of the way. Again, you don't want anything that you need to keep pushing up or, fiddling with while you're working. If it's floppy clothes that keep getting in your way, change your shirt, whatever. You just don't want to have to mess with anything that's not food while you're cooking. Long jewelry, necklaces or bracelets that keep falling down your arm or swinging out in front of you that you have to keep adjusting, take them off. The less distraction you have, the better your cooking is going to be. So, having said all those housekeeping things, let's talk about apples. The apples that you use in making applesauce, the best ones are the ones that have kind of a mealy consistency. A lot of people only know Red Delicious apples, and that's fine, and they're good apples. But there are there are hundreds of different kinds of apples out there, and they each have their own characteristic and their own texture. And the texture that you're looking for applesauce is a soft, mushy apple. Macintosh, Red Delicious, even Yellow Delicious, I think Cortland or Rome are soft, mushy apples. Those kind of apples, they're usually the cheaper apples in the grocery store. So those are the kind that you want for your applesauce. You can use other kinds. There are other kinds that are better for pies and things that you want to have an actual piece of apple to bite into. You want a firmer product. And those are like Granny Smith, Fuji, Pink Lady. There's a few that are really crisp, solid apples. And you can use those because you're going to cook them and the apples will break down as you cook them, but it may take longer. The consistency may not be as smooth with the harder apples. But that's just a matter of taste, matter of convenience. what you have in your fruit drawer. Right now, the ones I'm going to use today, I have a few. This is a Gala apple, which is another, it's crisp when they're not completely ripe, and then they ripen, they get soft. You can see this one is kind of wrinkled. And applesauce is a great way to use up these apples that don't look very appetizing anymore, but they're still not bad. Like you don't need to throw them out just because they have a wrinkly skin. Peel off that wrinkly skin, pop them in the pot and cook them into applesauce, and you're good to go. So I have a few of these, and I have some, actually I have some pink ladies, which I mentioned before, that, sorry, they're wet as I wash them, which are a firm apple, but these have been in my fruit drawer for a while, so they're starting to get a little soft. And I wouldn't be surprised, a few of these had bruise marks inside the apple, so I wouldn't be surprised if I found bruised apples. The other ingredients we're going to need, or may not need, it depends on your own taste. You may want to have some sugar. I have white sugar here, or you can use brown sugar, and it's totally your taste, what you like. Some additional ingredients you may want to add. Some people like cinnamon in their applesauce. And you could also use some other like apple pie spices, like this is cloves. You use that in pie. I have this pie spice mix that is cinnamon, vanilla sugar, mace, which is part of the plant that you get nutmeg from, ginger, nutmeg, aniseed, and clove. So there's a nice aromatic blend of spices that smells just like apple pie. You can put that in your applesauce. Woo! You can put ginger in there if you want to give it a little bit of a kick. You could put nutmeg. That's also an apple pie spice. And anything that gives that warm, spicy taste to apple desserts would be good to use in this. You will need also a little bit of water for your pan. This is kind of a fly by the seat of your pants recipe, in that you just sort of, I don't have a measured recipe for it. It depends on how many apples you use. If you got a packet from the library, you're going to have 4 apples. So I'm going to cut up 4 apples, and we'll see how full our pan is. The other things you're going to need, you'll need a cutting board and a knife. I have a paring knife here. I have a chopping knife. You may only have a paring knife in your house. You may not want to use a chopping knife because it looks like something that could hurt you very badly. Although if you learn the right way to use it, you probably won't have many problems with that. You also need a peeler, and I have a variety here of examples. This is a swivel peeler, which means that the blade moves back and forth. Yours may have a metal handle like this, but it does the same thing. This is a stationary one. Doesn't move. It's just a plain old peeler. This is a peeler and corer. It looks like a death device, but it's useful for, you can stick it in your apple, turn those deadly teeth, and pull your core out. You may have something like this, or it may just be like a round tube that you can just stick into the apple and turn and get the core out. That might be something you have in your utensil drawer. You never know. Sometimes people have things that they have in their drawer that they never use, and they don't know what they're for. So that's why I'm here to help you with that. You may also have one, I don't have an example of it, that has a handle that's shaped like a U, and then the blade goes across, connecting the two ends of the U, the Y. It's shaped like a Y, and then the blade goes across and connects. And then you kind of pull the peeler down over your food. I don't have one of those to show you, but not too hard to learn how to use that. So the first thing we're going to do, you're going to make sure your apples are all washed and clean. The reason we wash our produce, even if we're going to peel it, is because they come from a farm. And what's on farm? Animals. And animals carry some pretty gnarly germs. So we want to make sure that our things that we're working with are as clean as we can get them. Even organic produce, especially organic produce, because a lot of times they use animal manure to fertilize, and manure or poop that's decayed poop can carry E. coli and other bacteria. So you want to make sure everything's rinsed off really well and clean before you start. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to peel our apples. And I'm going to show you the way that I do it. I have to move my camera a little bit because this is not good. Okay, so I'm going to show you the way I do it. And I'm going to use my swivel peeler. And there are a couple ways you can do it. You can just kind of go like this, away from you. You just take off some of the stuff at the bottom, take off that stem at the top, and just sort of make a starting place here. And then if your peels are soft like mine are, this might not be the best way to do it, but you can peel away from you like this, and it's a lot messier than the way I prefer to do it, but if you feel safer doing it this way, that's perfectly okay. And I think this takes longer too, because you have to keep going over places that you miss. That wasn't good. Stuff like that happens. You just, if it's something rinsable like this apple, I just rinsed it off really well. Just, you gotta keep hanging on to your thing that you're working on and not let it slip out of your hands. Okay, now see, that's getting bogged down on a little gunch that's in there. And a little bit of peel in there is not going to hurt you. If you're really, really not liking to peel it, I think you could probably cook this without peeling it, and then you'd have to press your applesauce through a strainer or a sieve to get those things out, the peels. But it's better, I think, to just start without it. All right, so we have it peeled. Now we need to get that core out of there. And I'm going to use the paring knife to do the first one just to show you. Now, every time you use it, when you're holding a piece of food and you're using a knife, you want to make your hand into a claw and hold it like that, because when you're cutting, if your knife slips, it's less likely to cut you if it hits a flat surface like this than if you're extended like this. So you want to make sure your claw hand is already, keep your thumb out of the way because you're going to go down through the apple. So you want to get right in the middle of the core there and just chop it right down. And we're going to cut these into quarters just the same way. Try to find the middle as much as you can. Okay, this is one way to core. Now I'm going to show you how I do this. I use this part of the knife with these fingers to control a knife, and then I use my thumb to kind of brace so I have a way to come forward. So I'm kind of squeezing as I go. So I'm going to go down on this side, go halfway, and then I'm going to go underneath that skin, go down around the core, and voila. And the next apple I'll show you another way, and then you just do the same thing, come up underneath. Oh, I went too deep. broke it, but that's okay. We have to chop it up anyway. Always plant your thumb so you have some stability, and you can do that squeezing motion toward your thumb. And one more. Go up under that little bit of skin, down underneath the core, up under that little bit of skin, underneath the core. Okay, and just check and make sure you don't have any little bits of the seed casing still stuck in there, because that's not pleasant to eat. So now, the smaller you cut your pieces, the less time it takes to cook the applesauce. I'm just going to do, like, cut the quarters in half into how many? Half of a quarter is, do the math, 1/8. So we're just going to do this. This one's okay. So we have these, and I'm just going to cut them, maybe 1-inch pieces. I don't want to spend too much time waiting for them to cook. Like I said, you can just do that. You can leave them like this, but you'll just wait longer for them to cook because it has more apple to penetrate. The heat has more to penetrate when you leave them bigger. So we'll do that. Okay. Oh, get that one. They're all pretty much the same size, more or less. And we'll pop those into our pan. Did I say we needed a pan? I don't remember, but we do. Make sure you have a pan that's big enough to fit all the apples you're going to cut. So I'm just going to pop these in here and move on to the next apple. Okay, this one I'm going to show you how I like to peel. Get rid of that stem. Sometimes it's stubborn and doesn't want to come out. Come on, you stem, get out of there. That's what's really stuck. Go. Get out of there. Okay, I'm going to show you how I like to peel, and I think it's a lot neater, but it may make you nervous, so whatever you feel better with, do it. So I get my squeezing position. I plant my thumb, stick in my peeler, and pull it or squeeze it toward my thumb. And then I just keep going around and around the apple. And isn't this a lot neater than the other way? And if you don't pull too hard, if you're just very gentle as you pull, you're not going to hurt yourself. And I think that's probably faster too. Just take that. Okay, and look at that. One little pile versus... Now I'm going to show you another way to cut the apple, to core the apple if you're not comfortable with how I showed you before. So you can just take, look where the core is there, and cut next to the core down through. Oh, I got a little bit of the seed. So then you can put that down like that. Use your claw hand. And then you just go around around the core like this. And I'm not doing a very good job here because I keep catching those little doodads. We can cut those out later. Feel it right there. And then just go around. And you waste a little bit of apple right there. And if you listen to my videos enough, you'll know I hate to waste things. And you can just sort of dig out those little... because they're kind of like, I don't know, fingernails. They're hard little pieces that you can find in your apple products if you're not careful. Just kind of Put around them a little bit. Oh, and this one was bad. I'm just going to have to cut that one out. Always, always, always have an adult present with you if you're using a knife in the kitchen or anywhere. You just want to have that extra protection, another set of eyes watching you, just in case something happens. Okay, and you just cut these up. And they're all different sizes, so you just have to take each one as it is. Okay, these are ready for the pot. I am going to say that 4 normal sized apples will probably give you about 2 cups of applesauce. So I'm gonna, ooh, that one came right out. Get in there. I keep going with this way of peeling because it's faster. And I see this one has some bruises that we have to deal with as we go. Okay, so if you're using this kind of peeler, you have this little doodad on the end that can just scoop out those. Or if you have a knife, you can just do a little, take them out. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. Now, if you have a chopping knife, you just do the same thing. Just make sure you have your claw hands when you're holding. Especially important when you're using a big knife. Just take a firm hold. I like to pinch my blade between my thumb and forefinger. It gives me a little bit more control over it. Like that. And then just be careful because once they're peeled, they're a little slippery. So they can pop out, slide out from underneath you. A little bit of the seed casing there. Just if you take your time and you don't get too crazy, it's not so bad with a knife. You just have to be careful. Just remember that it's something that you need to give some respect to because it can hurt you if you don't use it right. But if you do use it right, you'll be okay. Okay. There's this one. Cut it into our 4 divided by 2. Or no, 4 times 2. Sorry. Got my math backwards. And you can practice your math by estimating how many pieces you're going to have. If you cut 8 pieces, each piece of 8 into 3, 8 times 3, wait for it, 24. So you got 24 pieces. No, I'm wrong. 8 times 3. What is 8 times 3? Is it? Yes. Oh my gosh. I need to go back to school. Am I smarter than a 5th grader? I'm not sure some days. Okay, I'm going to show you if you don't have one of those peelers. This is a little bit more tricky, but you do the same squeezing, pulling motion, but you have to start. And probably a wrinkly apple is not the best example of this. but you have to keep your knife blade very close to the surface, but you just continue like a peeler, except you're the one controlling how deep your knife goes. So you just want to kind of skim under the edge and just squeeze that knife toward your thumb. If you do it very gently and very slowly, you're not going to cut yourself. You just have to, takes a little bit of fine motor skill here, a little bit of control in your hand movements. You just have to keep bringing your knife close to the surface, just underneath the peel. Okay, that. I actually watched some chefs online to see how they cut apples. I wanted to do this the other way. Oh well. How they cut apples online. A lot of them do it the way I do it. But there was one very famous chef named Jacques Pepin, French chef, who does it like this. And he does the core the way I showed you. He didn't really pick those out. I'm going to do this one the way I know. And you just bring your knife down. Sometimes you can just curve it and pull the whole thing out. Okay. If you have a big chopping knife, you can cut more pieces at one time. But a paring knife does the same job, just takes a little longer. It's all good. So now we need a little water. So I'm just going to move the camera over so you can see. And you're just going to put just enough to go about halfway up the apples. You don't want to swamp the apples. You just want enough to kind of coat the bottom of the pan so they don't stick when you cook them. And you're going to need a lid, a tight-fitting lid to go over this. And we're going to put this on the stove. So I've got my pan on the stove. I've turned my heat to high because I have an electric stove, which takes a while for the burner to get heated up. And I will start it on high just until the burner gets hot, and then I will turn it down to about medium low. And I need to get my lid and put it on top there. And let that. If you have a gas stove, and a gas stove is the one where the little flames come up underneath, you will have instant immediate heat, and so you can just immediately turn it down to medium. You just want to simmer the apples, which means you just want to lightly boil them, just a little bit of bubbles. You don't want a big bunch of bubbles because there's a lot of sugar in apples and it caramelizes, which makes it sticky, which makes it burn. Sugar burns very quickly. So you want to make sure you cook these kind of slowly so you don't scorch them, burn them, or do anything that's going to make your applesauce not beautiful. So we're just going to let that heat for a little while. I have a spoon here to stir it up when they start to get going. We'll come back when there's some bubbles to be seen. Okay, you can see in here, it's just starting to bubble. Now, if you have an electric stove, it's going to retain that heat for a while. So you may want to take your pot off and let it cool down a little bit, because you don't want big bubbles bubbling up as you're cooking. You just want kind of gentle, barely there bubbles bubbling up. We're just going to put the lid on. I actually turned this down to a 2 on my stove because I know my stove, and that's a good simmering level. You, as you get more used to using your kitchen, you get used to your appliances and what works best. So keep practicing, because you'll just get better. So yeah, it's kind of calmed down. That's even a little bit too much, but as the burner cools, it'll calm down even more. We're just going to let that go for about maybe 15 minutes. I'm going to set my timer. And then we'll check back in about 15 minutes and see if they're mushy. So you think after all this time I would know the limitations of my phone camera, but apparently I'm still learning. I accidentally deleted the section where I took the apples off the heat and tested them to make sure they were cooked and drained them, and you missed all of that. So I have to describe it to you because I can't go back and do it again because the thing's already done at this point in time. So what I did was I stuck a fork into the apples to make sure they were nice and soft and smushy. You should be able to mash them with a fork. And then I took them off the heat. They had a lot of juice on them, a lot of liquid. So I drained that. I drained them through a drainer. I saved the water that came off of it, I saved into a bowl. And then I put that back in the pan. And I'll show you what happens next. Okay, so this is very hot. You should probably use a hot pad if you're going to do this. You might want to let your apples cool down. I'm just going to... And you notice they're still in chunks, so there's a couple things you can do. You can just kind of smush it with a fork until they're mushed up. This will not be as much of a problem with the softer apple. These were still a bit firm, I think. And you see there's juice still in there, so you can do this till they're all smushed down. If you have a potato masher, something that looks like this, you can smush it down with the potato masher. You can continue to cook it until they just dissolve, which I don't recommend because the more you cook something, the vitamins leak out. So you don't want to do that too much. So you just keep mashing until you get the consistency you like. Some people like chunky applesauce. Some people like really, really smooth. If you have a food processor or a blender, you could throw it in there and that'll make it really, really fine. And I actually returned the juice to the pan to cook it down. So we'll see what that looks like in a little bit. So just keep smushing down your applesauce till you get it where you like it. Make sure you have a big enough pan to do this with. Because the stuff does move around. I probably should put it in a slightly larger bowl. Okay. So we're going to just let this sit here for a little bit until it cools off, and then we can proceed. I want to show you briefly what's going on in this pan. This is what's called reduction in the culinary world. And basically what I'm doing is evaporating the water out of this so that all that's left are the juices from the apples and the sugars that came out while it was cooking. And as the water evaporates, the mixture gets thicker. The sugars start to caramelize, which means they brown. it will make like a kind of a syrup. There's not a lot, there's a lot less in there than what I drained off before, so the water is evaporating off. But this is a technique that's used in cooking a lot. Sometimes if you brown meat in a pan and you take the meat out and you put some water in and you stir up the brown bits that are in it, you will boil off the water then till the mixture thickens, and then you have sort of a pan sauce that you can put on your meat that you cooked. So that's reduction is used all kinds of ways in the kitchen for creating a sauce or a syrup that will that you can use for other food. So here's what's left. You see most of the water has gone. There's just a tiny little bit of, you see how thick that is? It's kind of syrupy. It got golden, it's starting to brown, and that's caramelized. So that's how much water was in that. But this is all, now what's left is sugar from the apple. So I'm just going to put that in my applesauce and stir it in to help sweeten. Okay, so I'm just going to pour that in, and as it cools it'll get thicker too. So now we have our applesauce, and mine is pretty much smushed up the way I like it. It is still a tiny bit chunky. If you don't like your applesauce that chunky, again, keep smushing it with your fork or your potato masher, or throw it in a blender or food processor if you have one till you get it. We could throw it back in the pan. No, don't do that. Okay, so that's pretty good consistency. It's thick, not too soupy. Good thing I took that juice out of there. So now I would let it cool completely before you taste it, but you may or may not need to sweeten it at all. But if you think you need to sweeten it, I would do whatever kind of sugar, if you want the white sugar or the brown sugar. You could even use honey if you wanted, if you want to try to keep it a little more natural. I don't know. But take a little taste. Always use a clean spoon every time you taste. You don't want to keep dunking your germs back in the pot where everybody's going to eat. But before I do any sweetening or flavoring, I'm going to take my cup out for my muffins that I'm going to make later. So if you want to make muffins with me, pull out a measuring cup full of applesauce. So yeah, you can see after I take this cup out, I can fill it up to the top and smooth it flat. After I take my measuring cup out, there's probably another cup of applesauce left. So that's probably a good measure. Figure out, I would say a half cup is a serving. So figure out how many people you want to feed the applesauce to. So that would mean 2 apples equals 2 apples equals 1 cup. 2 good size apples equals 1 cup of applesauce. So for each person you want to feed, you want like 1 to 1.5 apple in when you're making the applesauce. So so now it's still warm. As it cools, it gets sweeter. I'm just going to taste a little bit and see. It needs something. It needs some sugar. So I'm going to add some brown sugar to mine, and I'm just going to do a spoonful at a time. It's better to not have enough and add more than to have too much. You can't take it out. I'm just going to put, that's probably close to a tablespoon, maybe 2 teaspoons. Stir it in really well. See how it tastes. better, but I still need a little bit more. And these apples that I used are a little bit bland, so I need something. And I have the other thing that I wanted to add. Something that I forgot to mention is really good in applesauce is vanilla. So I have brown sugar here and here, and I'm going to put a little dash of vanilla in there just to add a little bit more flavor to this. Yeah, that's good. So that was probably a tablespoon to this 1 cup. So if you do a ratio, 1 and 1. 1 cup of applesauce to 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. And probably white sugar as well. So then if you have 2 cups, your ratio multiplies by 2. So you 2 cups of applesauce, 2 tablespoons of sweetener. Okay, so I have my vanilla here. And at the beginning of the pandemic, it was really hard to find real vanilla. And I recommend real vanilla over the vanilla flavoring that you can sometimes get. Even though, and if that's what you have, that's fine. It's inexpensive and it gives vanilla flavor, but it's not real vanilla and there's chemicals in it. So I try to stay away from that as much as I can. So I'm going to put, I have a ½ teaspoon here, but I'm not even going to fill that up. I'm just going to do like a 1/4 and vanilla, pure vanilla extract. Anyway, what I was saying was it was really hard to find real vanilla that was affordable at the beginning of the pandemic when I really, really needed it. So I went online and got this vanilla from Etsy, which is an online marketplace for people who make their own stuff. So it was supporting someone who has a business out of their home, and I got vanilla that didn't cost as much as what I would pay in the grocery store. So it was a win-win kind of thing. I mix that in really well. Ooh, adds just a little something, a little bit extra. It's really tasty. If you want, now's the time to add your spices. If you don't want to use vanilla, if you don't have it, and you want to spice it up with something else, like I said, the cinnamon, the pie spice, nutmeg, all of that. And I would just put in like a 1/4 teaspoon to start. Stir it in and taste it and just see if it's strong enough. Like I said, you can always add more. You can't take out what you put in if you put in too much. So just, this is, you're free to experiment. A lot of times in baking, you don't have a lot of room because you're relying on chemical reactions in the ingredients to produce a certain result. And with something like this, you can play around with it. You can add, instead of water, you could add some kind of fruit juice, like maybe cranberry juice. So you'd have like cranberry applesauce, or I don't know, even orange juice, just to add a different flavor. Pineapple juice. I don't know. That's up to you. You can play with it, or you can just have it plain and simple and enjoy your applesauce.